what do you know about food? Specifically, what do you know about meat? If you're like most people, you probably buy meat at one of the big box chains, your Sobeys, your Loblaws, maybe even Walmart. You walk into the store, you see a shrink wrap tray, maybe even some marketing, some badges on it that says product of Canada, maybe raised by a Canadian farmer. It looks clean, it looks safe. But here's the real question. Do you know where that meat comes from? Do you know how it was raised? Do you know how it was processed? How it was shipped? How far it was shipped? How that animal was treated before it lands in that neat little package under those fluorescent lights at the grocery store? And the truth is that most people have no idea. And the truth is, the story for that meat is quite frankly a lot darker and stranger than you can probably imagine. So let's take an honest look at it at the big box store beef and chicken. And then we can talk about an alternative. We can talk about actually shopping at your local butcher or from a local farmer or your local farmer's market. And spoiler alert, better in every way if you actually buy from a local farmer. But let's start with beef, because beef is the anchor of your grocery store meat department. Where does Sobeys get their beef? Well, in Atlantic Canada here, they get it mostly from Atlantic Beef Products, which is a major producer based in Prince Edward Island. And it sounds quaint, it sounds local, it's a great name. But here's the catch. The plant does not only take cattle from PEI. It draws from all over the Maritimes, and sometimes from Ontario, and if supply is tight, they might even bring in beef from Western Canada. And then even imported beef from the US or South America comes into Canada under quotas and winds up in your grocery store case. And once beef leaves the farm, the farmer is completely out of the picture. Unless, of course, they want to use you for marketing. They want to slap you on a commercial, on the label. You know, so you can trust those billion-dollar brands. They're just a small farmer. But these animals go into massive slaughterhouses. They're broken down, they're boxed up, they're vacuum sealed, and they're shipped to distribution centers. Then they're trucked to your local Sobeys, and that steak that you're buying may have traveled thousands of miles and been handled by dozens of different intermediaries before it ever hits your grocery cart. Now, what about freshness? Grocery store chains often use modified atmosphere packaging to keep beef looking fresh, looking bright red, sometimes for weeks after it's cut. And it's not artificial dye. Some people think that they dye the meat. That's not true, but it's still a trick doing it under artificial atmosphere. Oxygen levels are manipulated so the meat stays red longer. And then when the package is finally opened at home, that color will quickly dissipate. I mean, you've probably seen it for yourself. But then in some cases, beef can legally be irradiated, treated with radiation, or pressure treated, not always, but sometimes, to extend the shelf life or kill bacteria. But oftentimes, most people wouldn't know that necessarily by looking at the label. You're looking for something that says beef, says steak. And then that bright red ground beef, it's the same story. It can be a mix of a bunch of different cuts from multiple different animals, all ground together and then packaged in controlled atmosphere and then shipped across provinces. Nothing on that label tells you the age of that meat, the size of the feedlot that it came from, or whether the cow ever saw a blade of grass. Now, if you compare that to buying directly from a farmer, you can ask them, what do you feed them? What do you feed your cattle? Are they on grass? You can probably even see it if you know where they are. You can ask them if they use hormones or antibiotics, and you'll get a straight answer. Maybe, yeah, the steer was sick when it was young, got a course of antibiotics, but never anything serious, like it wasn't continuously sick. I mean, of course they could lie to you, but it's much harder to do that face to face than it is through multiple intermediaries at the grocery store. But you can get a freezer full of beef that you know was where it was raised, you know where it was slaughtered, you know where it was cut. It's cleaner, it's fresher, it's honest most of the time. So let's move to chicken. That's beef. What about chicken? People assume chicken is simple. It's lighter, it's cleaner, maybe it's even healthier. But the supply chain is just as industrial as beef, and sometimes it's even worse. You've probably seen documentaries of how bad chickens are treated. They're still animals, they're still living beings. In Canada, it's under something called supply management. And that means the government sets the production quotas, farmers raise chickens to order, and then processors buy them in bulk. Over 90% of chicken processed in Canadian stores is raised domestically. It's raised here in Canada. And that sounds reassuring until you until you realize what domestically actually means. These chickens aren't running around in green pastures, despite what their marketing might make you think. They're held up the majority of them are held up in giant barns with tens of thousands of birds under one roof. They're fed standardized rations. They're brought to weight in as little as 6 weeks. And then they're shipped, often long distances, to industrial slaughter plants. And there's only a few of them, like Maple Lodge, Maple Leaf, Sunrise, Lilydale. They're massive facilities, and they're processing thousands of birds an hour. And then from there, it's mostly the same story as beef. You cut it up, package it, and you ship it to national distribution centers. And then finally, days later, it's trucked to your Sobeys, your Loblaws, your Walmart, your Costco. You pick up your styrofoam tray, chicken breasts. It looks pristine. But do you know where it came from? Probably not. And not usually. And here's the kicker. While most chicken is Canadian, the cuts that people want the most, the breasts and the wings, they're sometimes imported under tariff quotas. So that means that your Canadian chicken or chicken in a Canadian store might not be Canadian at all. And even if it is Canadian, doesn't mean that those animals were treated humane. Conditions vary, and labels like raised by a Canadian farmer or certified humane sound good, but they don't appear on every package. And even if they do, you'll probably see it as massive marketing that they like to use. And Sobeys will tell you that their broiler chicken suppliers meet national welfare standards for their chicken. And that's the minimum. They'll also point out their certified humane chicken line in Quebec, for example. And that's true, but again, do you know the difference when you're standing in the grocery store looking at these trays? Probably not. You're looking for chicken and one is just more expensive. Can you guess which one? Probably certified humane, whatever, the better marketed one. And just like beef, sometimes chicken is treated post-slaughter. Washed, chilled, pressure processed, anything to extend its shelf life, which is perfectly legal and not always obvious. The product looks just as fresh, looks just the same, but the supply chain is anything but. And then again, you compare that to your local farmer. You buy a bird from someone down the road. You maybe even saw the pasture. You saw it being raised. You probably know what the feed was that they fed it, mostly grass and bugs. And it's processed in a small plant or directly on the farm, fresh, that week. Those chickens taste different. So here's the bigger picture. You got Sobeys, Loblaws, Walmart. They present you with an aisle full of options. Dozens of trays of meat, different cuts, different prices. Often it's just the illusion of choice. Almost all of it comes from the same handful of giant packers and processors. The beef industry is dominated by Cargill, JBS, and a few Canadian plants. The chicken industry, like I said, Maple Leaf, Maple Lodge, Sunrise, just a few big names, but it's centralized, it's controlled, and it's opaque. They only want you to know what they want you to know. What you don't get at the grocery store is a relationship. You don't get answers, and you certainly don't get accountability. You get a label, a logo, maybe a little bit of a brand story if they like to throw the farmer in there for marketing, but that's probably it. Compare that to at a farmer's market where the choice is real. You can talk to a farmer. You can buy directly from the person that raised that animal. If something's not right, you know. You know who to call. Because that happens. And your money stays local. Instead of patting the pockets of people in Toronto or Vancouver or New York, it supports your family down the road. Probably as a son or a daughter on your kids' hockey team. And let's be honest, the difference aren't just philosophical. They're about your health and ethics, too. Pasture-raised beef is richer in omega-3s, vitamins, and minerals than grain-fed beef and feedlot beef. Pastured chicken has better fat profiles than industrial broilers. Small farms don't rely on the same scale of antibiotics. They don't need them. They aren't running thousands, tens of thousands of animals through the same confined spaces and barns and feedlots. And then beyond your health, there's flavor. If you've ever had a steak from a local cow raised on grass, you know the difference. Like, it's night and day. If you've ever roasted a chicken from a local farm, totally different. You know it doesn't taste like that pale, watery grocery store chicken. That meat is firmer. The flavor is deeper. It's what real food actually tastes like. So here's the bottom line. When you buy from a grocery store chain, you are most likely outsourcing your standards to the lowest common denominator. It's about convenience. When you buy from a farmer, you get to take back that control. So next time you're standing in the grocery store, you've got dozens of aisles, or dozens of packages of meat. I want you to ask yourself, do you really know what you're buying? Do you know where it came from? Do you have any idea? Do you know where it was raised, how it was treated, how many hands that it had to pass through before it actually lands in your cart? And then, by comparison, go to the farmer's market. Talk to somebody who raised that meat. Ask them questions. Ask them how they raise them. Ask them what they feed them. Ask them what drugs they use, hormones they used, if any. And you'll probably be shocked what the answers are. And I don't think I need to tell you which one tastes better. Ultimately, you'll probably start to realize that supporting local farmers is just better for you. And not just for you, it's better for everyone.